Good morning and welcome to the Skeptic Track at Dragon Con. Woo, day two. we're halfway, we're coming in on the halfway point. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Angie, I'm the Assistant Director. With us this morning we have Don Prothero, who is going to be joining us streaming as he has classes that just started and couldn't get away for the weekend. He's a paleontologist. You've seen him on the BBC, you've seen him on TLC. He's written more than 30 books and hundreds and hundreds of papers, and he knows more about rhinoceroses than anybody else. So please welcome Don Prothero.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Sound good up there? I can't get any direct feedback here. I'm assuming you're all good. It's weird because I'm just getting up myself. It's only 8:30 in the morning in California. My whole family's asleep, but I know it's East Coast time for you guys. So let me get started. So this is talk is based on a book I published last year called Weird Earth, which I'll talk about some of the highlights of that book in today's presentation. And the theme of the book is basically how weird ideas, and now especially about weird ideas about the Earth, but also we know a lot of weird ideas about other aspects of science, are becoming a very big problem in the United States now and across the world, but especially in this country. All sorts of science nihilism and science illiteracy is a really big problem, and that's going to be my major theme today. And so when the book I wrote, Weird Earth, came out, it was sort of a follow-up to a number of other books I've written about debunking various crazy ideas out there like UFOs and aliens, which I did a book on with Tim a couple of years ago, and then I did a book about Bigfoot and other cryptids. So this is debunking weird ideas about the Earth, like the flat Earth and all these other things you think about. So let's take the slide here, and we'll take a little Rod Serling, and consider the following. We find out that the media just love running these stories about celebrities. Mostly celebrities are famous for being famous and not famous for really actually not ideas. They think the world is flat. From View co-host Sherry Shepard to Tila Tequila, who I have no idea what she does, but is apparently not science, to various sports figures and athletes, again, who are not necessarily scientifically trained and qualified to judge this issue. And many others as well. Just last week in the media, Shaquille O'Neal came out and said this. He's done it before, and the last time he did it, before the present one, he also later explained he was punking the media, because Shaq is famous for doing that. Those people are mostly just getting media attention for media attention. But there are some people who really put their lives on the line over these crazy ideas. And you may have heard this. This happened February 23rd, 2020, just before COVID actually started. A guy by the name of Mike Hughes, who's a famous stuntman, and he built lots of sports cars and race cars and motorcycles, built himself a homemade rocket and then put himself in the media over and over again, claiming he was going to shoot the rocket himself high enough into the sky to be able to say whether the Earth is flat or not. And as most of you know, he's had a bunch of failures over one time after another. And finally, on February 20th of 2020, 23rd of 2020, he did launch himself off the floor of the Mojave Desert, next to one of my favorite fossil localities, actually. And it's about a 30-second rocket ride before everything fell apart, and he crash landed. And of course, the irony is, he could have shot that rocket up 4 times as high and successfully landed, still wouldn't have proven anything. He wasn't nearly high enough to see the difference. But of course, this stuff is still reported in the media because it just gets all sorts of attention just because of the craziness. And then there was another example of this. A rapper named B.O.B. Was rapping about flat Earth and called out Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson took his time to respond to him, and also had his son help him create a rap in return. So they had a rap battle over the flat Earth and so on, which you can look up online if you're interested to find out what their raps are like. All right, so this is sort of a wrap up of what we just said here. We get mostly celebrities, not scientists, celebrities, mostly those who are not famous for being educated in anything, especially not in science. They get media attention by saying the Earth is flat. Okay, and there's minor celebrities, as I said, like Sherry Shepard, Tila Tequila, some are who are just famous for being famous with no actual proof that they actually have talents of any kind. And then athletes are Wilson Chandler, Denver Nuggets, Kyrie Irving, his Brooklyn Nets, Shaquille O'Neal, as I mentioned before, and Stephon Diggs of the Buffalo Bills, and various rappers. And then, of course, my man Mike Hughes, who actually died trying to prove it. This is the kind of people who get media attention over this type of issue. And what's going on here? Why is flat eartherism suddenly becoming a big deal? I mean, I don't remember ever seeing much mention of it, or once in a while, every few years, we get one story about a bunch of cranks who believe in flat earthism. But it's not like today when you see so many people doing it. And I'll talk a bit later. It's shocking how many people agree with this. The first thing, of course, it's about the media, right? If it bleeds, it leads, is an old statement in journalism. Outrageous sensationalism sells papers and gets views. And so if you can get people to hear you're telling a story about someone who believes flat earth, you can guarantee people will pay attention. And this is the main thing behind it primarily, okay? It's also a part and parcel with all this sort of anti-expert, anti-knowledge trend that's coming very prominent now in American society. And of course, this embrace of conspiracy thinking that's coming across now, where all this conspiracy thinking was promoted all the way from the White House on down during the last administration. And of course, probably the biggest factor that changes this versus in past, when flat earthers would make the media once in a while, is the internet. Okay. In the old days, even in the 1990s, you could not get many people hearing about this. And if you did hear about it, it was an accident, and it was very hard to follow up on it. There was a famous show on Coast to Coast Radio by Art Bell late at night that would occasionally bring a flat earther on. And that was about as much media attention and media seriousness as it got. Thanks to the internet, the great cesspool of lies, the internet is garbage in, garbage out everywhere. And you can pretty much guarantee that if you put something up, there will people will find it and they'll link it. And all of a sudden, thanks to our friends at Facebook and other internet search engines as well, you get all this connection between all these ideas, and you start searching one crackpot idea, then they find you a bunch of others to look at as well, and then you sink down the rabbit hole. That's something totally different from what we had not that long ago. I would say also, sadly, and you probably already heard this theme mentioned in this session today, critical thinking. We don't teach critical thinking. We don't talk about the kinds of logical errors and fallacies that are being made all the time, but that would help a lot. And instead, as you know, most science education right up through high school is mostly memorization of facts for a test without really knowing or understanding the evidence that supports it. When I teach a college level science class, even a non-majors intro class, I still insist that students understand the evidence, the facts that support the things we say about the world. And I will say a few things about that later in this lecture. All right. And then along with this basically defiance of expertise that we're seeing, especially from the right wing in this country, is also this idea that you can just do anything you want on the internet. You can look up research on the internet and you'll find out what you need to know. And so there's this idea that I can be as smart as you, I don't need advanced training, so-called democratization of knowledge. And of course, that's, as we'll talk about in a moment, a very dangerous thing in some ways, because you often don't realize your blind spots, okay? But something else, especially that applies to the topics of understanding the Earth, many ideas of science, especially in the science of the Earth and science of space, are not intuitive. They're not common sense, right? Up until a few thousand years ago, people did and largely believed the Earth was flat, because that's what it looks like from our perspective. They thought the Earth was the center of the universe because that's what it looks like from our perspective, right? They thought the sun and the moon were both objects in the sky, and the sun went around us rather than vice versa, again, because that's what it looks like from our perspective, right? And it's not natural in the way to think to understand it differently. It requires that you overcome common sense, your intuition, and understand that there is evidence that, in fact, we're going around the sun and not vice versa. And that's something school is supposed to teach you, but it doesn't teach you why we know this. It just tells you this. Okay, so this is the copy of the book I mentioned. It came out last year, Weird Earth, Debunking Strange Ideas About the Planet. I just happen to have a copy here at my desk, and they did a cool thing. The dust jacket has a hole in it so that this image of the Earth that you see the hole is sort of round. But if you take the dust jacket off, the original cover actually has a flat Earth. So it's a clever device. Unfortunately, now the paperbacks don't have dust jackets, so the whole idea from the designer is sort of ruined. So there's the actual cover without the dust jacket, and you see it has a flat Earth with the water spilling off the edge. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about a few, about 15 different examples of strange ideas about the Earth that are in the book. I don't have time to cover everything. And the major ones, especially things that are probably important now in the media, are flat earthers. And again, as I said a moment ago, intuitively, it looks like from our perspective, the Earth is flat. For normal distances that humans can see, we can't detect the curvature of the Earth, okay? And so to do that, then, if you have to believe your intuition and deny what science has told you, then you have to go into a really deep set of conspiracy nonsense and start out with a basic premise that everything everyone else has told you is a hoax or is a lie or is part of a conspiracy. And especially that NASA is part of a global conspiracy to fool us, and that not just NASA, but all other space agencies of all other countries are all in on the same conspiracy, which already makes it extremely improbable since we don't work that well with certain other space agencies. Okay. I deliberately wore my NASA t-shirt today just to be supportive here. And so if that's the starting point, you have to be deep into conspiracy mindset to even begin to do this, okay? Then you have this premise, the Earth is a giant disk, the sun and moon move around us in the sky, okay? You're back to where we were in the days before the last thousands of years of civilization. And therefore, and this basic model of flat Earthism, you'll find out now, our Antarctica isn't real. It's just a giant ice wall around the edge of the disk, and no one has ever actually gone past it or flown over the South Pole because that does not exist. And of course, everyone who claims they've done it is a liar. So you get, a giant web of conspiracy thinking going on here where almost all evidence is useless because they're impervious to evidence at that point. And of course, they have to reject a ton of basic physics and geology to make this work, including the ideas of gravity. Doesn't exist. And most of physics and mathematics, of course, have to be rejected because they show the Earth is round. So it's giant network conspiracies, right? The globe is a lie, moon landing is fake, space is fake, ISS is fake, astronauts are actors, satellites are fake, evolution is a hoax, dinosaurs is a hoax. In other words, once you get down this rabbit hole, every other kind of conspiracy nonsense pretty much it calls with it. Okay, and so this is the way that most people who are involved in this type of thing think. Now, this is sort of a cartoon of the model that they will tell you they believe in, which pretty much is the pre-Middle Ages way of looking at the world. A flat disk with a sort of a dome at the heavens above us, where our supposedly atmosphere is, and then both the sun and the moon are moving in big circles around us. And supposedly that is why we have night in some parts of the Earth and the day in the other parts. Okay, this is the best they can do to come up with a model that supposedly explains why the sun and the moon appear to move around us and why we have night and day. However, as you know, if you have a flat disk, it doesn't work that way, right? If the sun is above us at any elevation at all, it's going to elevate, it's going to shine light on the whole Earth all the time. And you're not going to have anything like they have there. It just simply doesn't work. So it's this whole thing is a cartoon model, which is almost never thought of very carefully, not explored very carefully, and certainly not subject to any kind of really scientific analysis. All right. So they've actually done things like they've planned a party cruise where they're going to take a polar boat from the end of South America and cruise to the ice wall and try to document it and march up to the edge of it. And they actually talk about organizations, for example, which uses famous North Polar projection of the Earth and say that's not just a polar projection. That's what the real flat Earth looks like. Very strange things that follow from this kind of thinking. This is one of the more prominent guys. If you watch some of the documentaries about the flat earthers, he shows up often. And this is his little mechanical model he made up with two little light bulbs representing the sun and the moon to show this idea. Of course, it's just a little model. It doesn't actually work very well because if you try it out, of course, unless you make the sun extremely weak, you're not going to get a dark side of the Earth at any time, at a night or day. And more importantly, it simply doesn't have any physics or mathematics behind it, okay? And the minute you go past this kind of simple toy to doing real analysis of real data about the Earth or space, and you have to use physics and math, it doesn't work, right? Because what we know about space came from physics and math, starting with Isaac Newton, all right? And so this is something you'll find. It's almost always amateurs who have no training and no background in physics and math and can't do it and fear it very deeply. So this is sort of a quasi-scientific, cartoonish view of the world that they can make physical models of. This to them is sufficient to prove it to their own satisfaction. But anyone who knows enough physics and math will quickly find that they do not have answers for hundreds of different problems in the physics and math of calculating things that would be required for the Earth to be flat. So, as I said early in the lecture, one of the big problems we don't teach kids in science, even all the way through high school, is how much about the evidence for why do we say the Earth is not flat, the Earth is round, or why do we say the Earth is not the center of the solar system? Okay, and so in the book, I made a big effort to put in a significant section at the end of each chapter covering each topic, showing why we say this. This is what I try to teach at the college level when I cover these topics, but it's not covered in high schools or any earlier. And that's something that I feel is really part of the reason a lot of people don't get why science works the way it does and understand why we are confident of our scientific conclusions, because they don't teach you why we know something. What is the evidence? And I try to do this at college level, and sadly, we don't do this in the culture hardly at all. Let me just quickly give you a couple of the lines of evidence that I put in the chapter to show you the basics of what's going on here. And I'll quickly run down this list, and then I'll give you some pictures to illustrate it. We've known that the Earth is round since at least 200 BC. The Greeks knew this, okay? Other cultures knew this because they knew the Earth had a curvature when they watched angles of shadows, when they watched things going over the horizon, the ships vanishing over the horizon. And they noticed that when we cast the Earth's shadow on the moon during a lunar eclipse, the curvature was always there, okay? And then those things were clear enough that by 200 BC, Eratosthenes, who was a Hellenistic Greek who lived in Alexandria, was aware that if you tried to look at the shadow of an object, let's say a stick in Alexandria where he lived, it would have an angle on the first day of summer. But he had read and then proved it that if you go to Syene, which is on the Tropic of Cancer, which is directly beneath the sun on the first day of summer, that there is no shadow. The whole rod is pointing straight up and down, and there's no angle. And so he calculated angle, and he successfully calculated the size of the Earth in 200 BC. So basically, we've known the Earth is round since 200 BC, and it's been proven since that time as well. Other things as well. If you actually travel in the southern hemisphere, which I have done, and watch the sky, you'll see different stars. Right? The northern hemisphere stars vanish at different latitudes. You see the Southern Cross as you get around the equator, and then you have totally different stars in the southern hemisphere, which is not explained by a flat Earth. Again, the lunar eclipse, the ancient Greeks knew that the Earth's shadow was always curved. Now, this Mike Hughes and his rocket, of course, would never work. It turns out you can't really even see the curvature when you're in a typical passenger airline around 40,000 feet, because for one thing, you have a tiny little window that isn't big enough to see much. If you're in the cockpit, you begin to see it, but really you have to be around 50 to 60,000 feet, and then this curvature is visible, okay? There's a very interesting experiment that was done in England by an astronomy club in central England, and what they did was they put a camera and a recording device and a transmitter on a weather balloon and let this weather balloon go and let it rise and rise and rise. And as it rose, it continuous view of the horizon. And it's actually online. You can watch the whole video in real time if you want to. And when it reached a certain elevation, you start to see the curvature, okay? So this is online. You can watch the entire footage of this weather balloon ascending until it reaches about 50,000 feet. By that point, the curvature is obvious, okay? If people really wanted the evidence, right, it's all there online along with the cesspool of lies. Again, other things. If the Earth was flat, there'd be no time zones, there'd be no seasons. As you saw, that model doesn't explain things like that. Gravity would be stronger at the North Pole than near Antarctica. Of course, flat earthers don't believe in gravity or in math. And then one other small coincidence, everything else in space that we can see is round or spherical, okay? So just the lines of evidence. Let me quickly just give you some illustrations of a few of those. So there's the proof from Eratosthenes. First day of summer, the sun is directly overhead at the Tropic of Cancer, which is right under Syene, which is shown here by the S in the center of the diagram. And then he lived up in Alexandria, where he used one of those obelisks. The Egyptians had so many as a sort of a light thing, and got a shadow of a certain length. So he calculated the difference in angle between the shadow here and the spot where there was no shadow because the sun was directly overhead in the first day of summer, and he successfully calculated the curvature of the Earth and its diameter within 1% of the value we now know. Pretty amazing for 200 BC. The most obvious proof, of course, is sailors knowing this right away. When ships sailed away and you had a good, clear view of the horizon, you watched them, they not only got smaller, but the bottom of the ship vanishes first, then the top. Okay, and so an object is far enough away, if the visibility is good, you're going to be seeing the top of the ship, the masts or whatever, last. And that basically could not happen. If it's just getting smaller on a flat surface, it would get smaller uniformly and the bottom would still be visible, but that's not what we see. All right, and so this appearance the ship sort of sinks out of view because the bottom of the ship goes behind the curvature of the earth as it's far enough away. And then a flat earther would never see this, right? A flat earth would just make the ship smaller as it got distant, but all parts would be equally visible. And this is the little rotating, repeating GIFs image here to show you this ship sailing away. The top structure of the ship is all you see after a while, and the bottom is completely invisible because it's in fact disappearing behind the curvature of the earth. Okay, or you can even do this with other type of phenomena besides ships, things that have a vanishing point, like a long set of transmission lines on Lake Pontchartrain. You can calculate this. You can do a little bit of surveying and prove that the vanishing point is not where you expect it to be. If it's flat, it's actually going this way, while the curvature makes the vanishing point drop downward. There's a famous story in one of these videos made about flat earthers where two of them are trying to do an experiment similar to this with a long set of lines surveyed across the distance, and sure enough, it's showing the earth is round and they're not sure what to do with it. And other objects over long distances and flat horizons, you can see, like, for example, a series of wind farms. They'll diminish, and eventually, as they get over the horizon, you only see the blades. You won't see the base of the wind farm. Okay, and then the thing the Greeks knew and many others knew, of course, is that when we cast our shadow during a lunar eclipse on the moon, the shadow is not a flat disk. It's not a little line. It's always a large curve or arc. This is one from 2011 from Budapest. And as the eclipse goes on, you can see the curvature on some of these middle images is quite striking. Curvature of the Earth's shadow as it goes over the moon. Right? So there's the eclipse on the right as we actually see it each time we have a lunar eclipse. If the flat Earth is happening, you would never get this edge right here. And a lot of the times you would end up getting the edge of the Earth that is flat, and you see a long band like that across the moon, which we, of course, never see. And, of course, here we go. There's a flat Earth among every other spherical body in the universe. A rather awkward, strange thing, and not very consistent with parsimony. So, as I said, you really need to be high in elevation, 50, 60,000 feet or higher before the curvature really shows up, which is why out of your little tiny window on an airplane at 40,000 feet, you won't see it. But if you're up in the cockpit, especially up at 50,000 feet, which some airlines do fly, you can see it. Okay, so every commercial airline pilot has seen it, but of course they're all part of the great global conspiracy along with NASA and every other science organization and space agency and all the rest. All right, and so the high altitude weather balloons have been used, and there's video, as I said, online where you can watch them do this experiment and watch it right up to the end. You'll see the curvature start to show up as they reach the highest elevations. So, of course, if the Earth was flat, cats would have pushed everything off it by now. And here are 40 people missing after the first Flat Earth Surfing Championship. Say the only thing Flat Earth has to fear is fear itself. Now, we'll segue from that to a second school of thought, which, of course, also dates back to ancient times and wasn't really transformed until fairly recently and pretty much by the work of Copernicus. And that is the idea that the Earth is the center of the universe, which flat earthers, of course, believe as well, along with many other cultures who do not accept modern astronomy or do not have a scientific viewpoint whatsoever. And this was something that was even harder for our culture to get rid of and harder for us to accept, because it does seem, if you only look at the sky from this particular vantage point and sitting on Earth and look up in space, you see everything else appears to be moving around us. And therefore, it seems more likely and more intuitive that we are the center of things, right? And that we're the center. Various objects are moving around us in various orbits, including the sun and the orbit between Venus and Mars, which, of course, is significant. And then, of course, the visible planets, we can only see them up through Saturn with a good telescope. Then the more distant planets are not visible without really excellent telescopes. So this is the old idea, as many of you remember from a little bit of high school science, called geocentrism, Earth centrism, whereas, of course, we are now heliocentric ever since Copernicus in 1453. And there are modern geocentrists, people who reject the last 500 years of science about the solar system. They turn out to be a group of people, mostly extreme fundamentalist Catholics. So they're Catholics who are most like fundamentalist creationists, but they're partly Catholic. They actually reject most of what the last 50 years of popes' decisions have been because the popes are too liberal for them. And they cite many biblical passages, which, if you take them literally, say, in fact, the sun does revolve around the earth. They actually have a website, I don't know if it's still alive anymore, called GalileoWasWrong.com. Although you really should start to make it Copernicus was wrong. Galileo was just promoting Copernicus's ideas from a century earlier. And again, intuition is misleading again. Science is not intuitive a lot of the time. Earth appears to be moving, or the Earth, from Earth, everything appears to be moving around us, including the sun. That's what common sense and intuition tell people. And only when science tells you otherwise, based on evidence, do we end up rejecting that idea. So here, the idea of heliocentrism, of course, officially started with Copernicus in 1543. But again, Galileo, Kepler, and the others in the 1600s pretty much established it. And then, of course, Isaac Newton built his entire physics around heliocentrism and the entire notion of gravity, of course, which these people also reject. And again, just like the flat earthers, they're great at generating publicity. They hold these phony conferences where they get together and scratch each other's back and try to sound scientific without actually doing science. They even made a pseudo documentary in 2014 called The Principle, where they tricked a bunch of scientists to appear in it, thinking that they were talking to a legitimate documentarian and a legitimate video documentary. And in turn, they were actually being quoted out of context and tricked into saying stuff that they ended up being, sounding like they doubted the idea of the heliocentric solar system. And the movie, of course, was a bust, right? It lost money, but that doesn't matter. It's about publicity. It's about getting people to actually take your view seriously. So there's one of their images from the website. Galileo's wrong. The church was right. Of course, the church of the 1500s we're talking about, not the church of the modern Catholic Church. So they have their own books. This guy, Robert Sungenis, is one of the main advocates for their movement, Geocentrism 101. Not really science in sense, really all biblical literalism dressed up as science. And again, like I did the previous example, it's always valuable just to say, how do we know these things? Why do scientists say with confidence that the Earth is not the center of the universe? And there are lots of different things you can do. The starting out with, of course, we actually have seen the Earth from space, and we know where it sits with respect to the sun and the other objects in the solar system. And of course, astronauts, all of them who've come back, have also been in that perspective where they can see this Earth moving around the sun. But of course, we can't go there because obviously we people at NASA are big hoaxers and part of the global conspiracy, along with all the governments and scientists of all the entire world, and no one has ever blown the whistle on this conspiracy, so that's not going to help us to proving to people like this. Once you're in that conspiracy rabbit hole, it's very tough to get out. Another demonstration, and many of you have ever been to a planetarium, usually does these. It's called Foucault's pendulum. I'll show you a picture of it in a moment. It shows the rotation of the Earth. And cannot be explained if the Earth is not rotating. Okay. Another thing that's related to this, again, because the Earth spins, it does what's called the Coriolis effect, something I spend a lot of time in my introductory oceanography and meteorology and every other course I teach which deals with atmospheres or oceans. It affects all fluids as they move around the Earth. They swing to either left or right, depending on which hemisphere they're in. A thing called the Chandler wobble. Okay, if you have very sensitive instruments and you can watch stars over time, you'll see that the Earth is pointing to slightly different positions with respect to stars over a very long period of time. It would be not possible if the Earth was the center of the universe. And of course, every other planet, our solar system is moving in the same plane, in the same direction. Geocentrism does not explain this. So if you have never seen a Foucault pendulum before, they have a very nice one here at the planetarium in Griffith Park here in Los Angeles, and many other cities have them as well. They're set up so there's a large pendulum, usually several stories long if it's a really large Foucault pendulum, and it's swinging in an arc back and forth and back and forth, and usually has to have a motor at the top so it doesn't wind down. And they'll illustrate its motions often by a series of pegs, which can be tipped over as the thing continues to turn around this arc. And each time it tips over a peg, it's moved another certain number of degrees. The school where I used to teach at Occidental College, we installed one of these from the second floor down to the first floor of our lobby area. And when it went over a certain panel on the circle around it, the sensor would light up. So they would light up until it was all lit up, and then they would shut off and then start over again. And the basic idea is that if you're spinning the Earth, okay, around an axis, and let's say you have a Foucault pendulum over the North Pole, make it really simple, and this Foucault pendulum rotates back and forth in a single plane. But as the Earth spins beneath it, it'll appear that the Foucault pendulum is turning, when in fact, of course, what's happening to the Earth is turning into the pendulum. The pendulum has a strict back and forth line of motion in one plane, and there's no reason for it to turn at all based on physics, so that when it does appear to have turned, actually what you're looking at is the base on which it's standing has turned. Okay? And likewise, the Coriolis effect, something I explained to my students. The best way to explain it, you'll see, for example, that air currents and water currents on the Earth in the northern hemisphere, if they go traveling across the northern hemisphere, always end up deflecting to the right, and the southern hemisphere they deflect to the left. And the best way to explain it, and this is the analogy that I use for my students in class, imagine you're on a big spinning merry-go-round, throwing a ball back and forth, and before you start the merry-go-round spinning, you throw the ball back and forth, and everyone catches it fine. Once you get it spinning fast enough, you throw it at your target. It'll, if you say it's going counterclockwise, which is how the Earth appears to rotate from the North Pole, if you look at it from that perspective, it'll curve off to the right of the person you were throwing at, to like here. All right, and what's happening, of course, if the simplest terms, is that if you're in a moving reference frame, a spinning reference frame, your target is moving that direction, counterclockwise or to your left. So as you throw the ball, the target moves away from where you threw it. So the ball, if you actually watch it, track it from a camera above, which you can do, and there's several videos online where you can watch this effect. The camera above will show the ball did go in a straight line, but the target moved out of range. It's like in basketball, right? You don't throw a basketball straight at your teammate. If the teammate's moving, you throw it to where the teammate's going to go, or else you'll miss him. All right, so again, there's crazy people out there who argue, just like in evolution, we should teach the controversy, and the Earth being in the center of the universe. Of course, it's not controversial except for a very small number of people, but nevertheless, it's not as insignificant as you might think. Here's another crackpot idea that's a little less well known, but has been around, and it's gotten a lot of play again because the internet gives the crackpot ideas equal billing with good ideas. It's actually once a legitimate idea that the Earth was expanding. The days before plate tectonics, famous Australian geologist by the name of S. Warren Carey was advocating the idea that the Earth was expanding because it seemed to explain the way a lot of continents had boundaries that matched together. Then plate tectonics came along and gave us an alternate explanation for that, namely that they were matched together. They torn apart and moved around the Earth's surface as the Earth has got a mobile crust around it all time. And then Carey's ideas, of course, no longer had any need. And so his ideas are now famous for being historically famous, but wrong ideas about the Earth. But the spanning Earth idea was still popular for a while, although geophysics has now shown there's no evidence it's ever expanded. We can look at ancient magnetic directions recorded in rocks that are 1 billion years old, and the evidence from their magnetic direction shows that the Earth's magnetic field and therefore its shape are pretty much the same as it's always been. There's no evidence that there ever wasn't expanding. However, again, the internet doesn't have peer review. The internet doesn't have quality check. The internet doesn't have fact checkers. You can put any shit on the internet you want. Okay, and an animator, an artist by the name of Neil Adams, put on a video, and if you want to watch it, just click Neil Adams Expanding Earth, you'll find it's still up there. And he has this very nice little animation, which looks like the Earth is expanding and all the continents are moving apart. And I won't take the time to debunk it here. It's, of course, debunked in the book. But if you take just 1 or 2 introductory geology classes, you can immediately see what's wrong with it, okay? It also has all sorts of things that don't match with the real evidence. But a cartoon is sufficient to explain, lure a lot of people into taking this stuff seriously. And once they click on a few Neil Adams videos, then they get sucked in by the search engines to get more and more of this garbage about the expanding Earth. Okay, the internet does not have a filter. The internet does not have quality control. The internet does not know right from wrong. So this is sort of a takeoff from one of his videos. There's the idea all the continents on one supercontinent completely surrounding the Earth, and then it spans this fast, right? In 6,000 years, this fast, which is, of course, ridiculous because lots of geophysical evidence shows that it doesn't expand like this at all. All right. Well, here's a fourth example, again, of weird ideas about the Earth. You won't find this very popular anymore, but once in a while it does emerge, especially on the internet, the idea of hollow Earth. You might remember if any read some classic Jules Verne, Journey to the Center of the Earth. When Verne wrote that in the 1870s, they knew nothing about the interior of the Earth. They knew that heat came up from below because deep mines did that. And of course, volcanoes have heat in them as they erupt from below. And people explored caves that went fairly deep. So they imagined caves like this could go all the way to the Earth's interior. But of course, you go a certain depth below the Earth, you cannot get any deeper before it becomes impassable for humans. Some of the deepest diamond mines in South Africa are so hot and the pressure is so great that miners can only spend a few hours down in the bottom of them with all the air conditioning and ventilation they can provide before they have to be raised up to the surface. A new shift goes in. The deepest we've ever drilled the Earth's crust is 12 kilometers in a borehole in Siberia. And that point, it's unimaginably hot and intense high pressures there. So that's not possible for anything to be deeper than that and survive. So the hollow Earth is basically just a crackpot idea from the days of the 19th century when they knew nothing about the Earth's interior. And then it gets traffic again because you put it up on the internet and other people start clicking on it. And then a lot of other hollow Earth sites are out there. And you can get people believing this because it's self-reinforcing. There were all sorts of books written before the days of the internet about tunnels, the Earth's hollow interior near the poles. And you could see these openings, these tunnels if you're on the North Pole. There's even a thread out there where the Nazis took Adolf Hitler and hid him in the hollow Earth. So he isn't dead. He's just in the middle of the hollow Earth. It's bizarre how far you can go with this stuff. So yeah, and there's the classic from the 1870s, Journey to the Center of the Earth, again, based on notions that were at that time not too outrageous because people had never gone deeper than certain deep caves and mines. Okay, so we, of course, know that is no longer possible. We know that because a huge amount of evidence in geophysics tells us about the interior. Most of the way in which seismic waves are bending as they travel through each of these layers, from the mantle to the outer core to the inner core and back out again. We can calculate exactly what path these seismic waves take. Some of them, we know, like the S waves, which have a shearing motion up and down, stop at the outer core. That would only happen if the outer core is liquid because you can't shear a liquid. So all this has been calculated since about the 1920s, 1930s, when they had seismographs around almost the entire Earth and could really get a worldwide coverage of the Earth. They were able to prove that that indeed is what the center of the Earth is like. That plus very, very deep volcanoes that come up from the mantle gives us samples of mantle rock that match the kind of stuff we see in these models. And of course, we get meteorites from other planets, which have iron and nickel in them, if they're from the core of another planet, and then they have composition closer to olivine and peridotite if they're from the mantle. All right, so there's a quick rundown of 4 major crazy ideas about the Earth's nature, its position in the solar system, its motions, its shape, its interior, its expanding or not expanding, and there are many, many others out there. The rest is about another 10 or 15 more chapters talking about just more weird ideas that concern the Earth. I did a whole chapter on the moon landings, okay, which I'm old enough to remember live. I was sitting in my relative's living room in near Rapid City, South Dakota, that summer of '69, July. I remember it vividly, watched it live on TV. And of course, that was all worldwide at the time. And even the Soviets, who are not exactly our friends in 1969, accepted it was real and congratulated us. And then about 10 years later, the moon landing story suddenly became part of a science fiction movie and novel, which then ended up becoming a basis for a whole bunch of conspiracy thinking out there that the moon landings were a hoax. And if you want to read about it, it's in my book. There's also a very, very good episode of, and I'm blanking out the show, Mythbusters. If you look up Mythbusters old episodes online and just moon landing, the two of them did it, Jamie and blanking their names again. Anyway, they did a whole episode debunking all the supposed evidence the moon landing is a hoax. So that would be the best way to understand it if you wish to develop further into it. There's all sorts of all here, especially when they made the big fuss about the millennium in 2000, 1999, 2000, and especially when they had this crank idea that somehow the world would end in 2012. They're always part of this is the magnetic field will reverse and cause devastations. Well, I'm trained in paleomagnetism. That is my specialty as a geophysicist. Paleomagnetic studies have been done for years on how the Earth's field reverses. And the Earth's field takes thousands of years to finish a reversal. It's a very, very slow process. We could never even observe it unless we looked all the way back at earliest human history. And even then, we probably wouldn't even be able to see the whole process. Thousands of years to take place, okay? You not do it overnight like in the crackpot ideas out there. And the difference between the Earth with its full magnetic field, bipolar magnetic field, and when the bipolar field disappears, there's still a non-dipole field. About 10% of the remaining field is non-dipole. That doesn't go away. So the difference between a fully dipolar field at maximum versus one when it's at its weakest and it's starting to switch is about the same magnetic field difference you feel if you're on the equator versus when you're on the North Pole. And that has no effect on any animal or plant that we know of, never causes extinction. It does not change the way in which radiation comes from space. That's all garbage from people who don't know anything about magnetism. There's an urban legend about earthquake weather, especially here in Southern California where we're talking about it. People often say, oh, I noticed it was a hot day when this earthquake occurred. But that's a classic case of you remembering one connection between two events. And correlation is not causation, okay? Turns out that earthquakes happen all the time, every day, all over the world, in any weather, and that there is no way to predict them from that reason as well. There's lots of cranks out there who say they can predict earthquakes, and they've always end up being just that, cranks, because they say they successfully predicted something after it happened, but you can't really check that. And if they did predict it, it's one of many, many other predictions that were wrong, okay? But the reason we, of course, earthquake weather isn't real is that the weather only penetrates a few meters down the surface of the Earth. Right? If you dig a burrow like desert animals do below a few meters down, it's cool and the temperature doesn't change much. The faults that make earthquakes are kilometers down below the surface. They don't know what weather's happening at all. There's no way weather could affect it. I put in a chapter about the Noah's flood story, which of course creationists are still pushing, and these young Earth creationists claim Noah's flood was real. I gave a whole bunch of evidence there about why it's not. And then the irony was, of course, the Noah's flood story was abandoned by devout Christian geologists in Britain in the 1820s when they saw how complex the geologic record was and how it could not be explained by a single Noah's flood. So it wasn't even, as the creationists claim, wasn't even evolution that caused people to doubt Noah's flood. It was the evidence of the rock record by Christian geologists that made them doubt Noah's flood. 50 years before Darwin's book was out, actually. And of course, the Earth, it's not 6,000 years old, no creationists claim. I do have a whole chapter on that. I do a chapter on Mount Shasta, which is one of the most woo-centered places on the planet. All these people go to Mount Shasta looking for a base for aliens or mystical powers. It's a really cool volcano. It has some great glaciers on it and some great snow on it, though this year with the drought and the weather, it's not having much snow at all. But there's nothing mystical about Shasta. I did a whole chapter on the Atlantis myth, which I won't have time for in this presentation. I did some stuff about people believing in crystal healing, because that's a geology topic as well, and dowsing. You've heard of dowsers, right? They use a sort of a forked stick or a pair of sticks to walk around, and supposedly that's some kind of attraction occurs and the sticks move when they feel groundwater beneath them. In reality, if you're walking anywhere on the Earth's surface, it isn't hard bedrock, but anywhere on a sedimentary surface, like in most valleys, and you dig deep enough, there will be water down there. There's water beneath almost everybody. Okay, so this is just basically, again, crackpot ideas. Dowsing does not work. Now, let me wrap this up by pointing out that in spite of our best efforts to educate people in science and school, we're failing, okay? The fact that so much of this garbage has gotten so much traction in American society is a very sad indictment of our culture and all the rest, right? We've got flat earth conspiracy thinking stories all the time now. We have 2/3 of American millennials believed the earth is round, which means a third don't or not sure about it, okay? And so the numbers are startling and very depressing. Only 66% of 18 to 24-year-olds are confident the world is round. That's pretty strange. I came from a generation where no one would ever question that. 94% of my generation older, I'm older than 55, pretty much was taught that and don't have any problem with it. And 85% of people under between 40s and the 50s agree. And then it drops off as you get to younger and younger people who were not trained the same way and who are more likely to learn stuff from the internet than they learn from school. A YouGov study found 84% of Americans saw this round, but 5% were not becoming skeptical. 2% said the word was flat. And there are others who are having doubts. If you do a Google search for flat Earth, it's been trending upward. A 99 Gallup poll found that 18% of Americans said the sun revolves around the Earth. Of course, a lot of that just basically don't understand what the terms mean, but still, it's scary that 18% of people still think the sun is the one revolving around the Earth and not vice versa. Young Earth creation is depending upon how you frame the poll questions, and that's critical because the poll questions are often biasing the way in which the answers are given. Maybe 30–40% of Americans think the Earth is only 6,000 years old, it's flat, it's the center of the universe, and produced by Noah's flood. All that's straight out of the Bible. And we get every year a major conference with hundreds of dire flat earthers showing up. There are conferences by geocentrists every few years, although I think they probably also got hit by the COVID shutdown of conferences. I didn't go to any conferences in 2020 or 2021 to speak of either. Okay. So, here's a third of Americans being polled. Someone put up a whiteboard here, and you can see the scary things, even though this is a joke, the point being that anyone would think it's flat. So why do we have this problem? Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, let me repeat a few of these points and say a little bit more about them. A lot of it has to do with this populism, especially right-wing populism, which is rejecting authority, rejecting expertise, resents being told by what is true by the elites, and certain political figures we will not name, of course, have exploited this. Right? They say, well, don't listen to authorities, don't listen to scientists. They're lying to you. They're part of a conspiracy. Global warming is a hoax, right? Evolution's a hoax. This is the kind of thing that's fed upon, and one particular political party is using it a lot in order to serve for especially the oil companies and energy companies who don't want you to believe in climate change. Conspiracy thinking, as you now know, especially in the last decade now, have really exploded. I mean, QAnon would never have even been taken seriously a few years ago. And now a huge number of Americans are QAnon followers and conspiracy nuts. And what was used to be the fringe is now a large part of the center of the Republican Party. Scary. It's just unbelievable that it's gone that far. And again, a lot of it has to do with basically people who don't trust any other authority but the internet and don't realize the internet is not censored, it's not filtered, not fact-checked, it's not quality controlled, it's not peer-reviewed. And the way search engines, as you all know, work is to, once you search one crackpot site, it'll make it easier to find a lot of crackpot sites. And then they keep going down from one to another until you've been watching for hours, and all of a sudden you're a believer in some crazy idea. There is no way to correct that. And of course, they don't want to correct that, right? Mark Zuckerberg and the rest don't want to correct that. They want you to be able to keep on going from one unfact-checked story to another, because that keeps you engaged. That's the whole idea. Whatever hooks your attention and keeps you paying attention is what their job is to do. Now, part of this is a basic class example, what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Ignorant people think they're smarter than they really are, whereas in life, once you have experience, you realize how little you know. And of course, people have said this long before Dunning-Kruger. Shakespeare said, a fool thinks himself to be wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool. Socrates, the only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. King Solomon, a fool is wise in his own eyes. And Ramasharma, I thought I knew a lot until I learned a little. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. It wasn't actually officially named by psychologists till the late 1990s, when Dunning and Kruger, of course, published official papers on it. And it's sort of like this: your belief in something, your conviction in something. When you have little knowledge, can be quite high, like a child. You just sure you know a lot about things, you have no questions about it, till someday in your life you start to realize that a lot of what you thought was true is not. And you go through an insecure canyon, and as you grow up, you go up and down fluctuations, but you gradually learn what's not right and what is. Okay, now here's a more conventional graph. Basically, people who don't know much perceive themselves as having ability, even though they don't. Whereas people who their actual ability is quite a bit much less than they think it is. Okay, and this is the big problem we have. Dunning-Kruger over and over again with a president who thinks he knows everything and clearly didn't know very much, okay, and still doesn't, or a whole bunch of people in a political party who tell their followers not to believe scientists and experts, but to believe their own intuition. I've done my research on Conservapedia and InfoWars and Natural News, okay? And that, of course, that's not research. And then since they're not learning anything new, they're just reading stuff on the internet that probably has no validity at all. A real scientist, of course, looks at the real world. And so here's our real scientist saying, that's cute, right? Or the pyramid of intellect, right? From high school to associate to bachelor's to master's PhD, and then apparently your friend who watches a YouTube video research says sheeple a lot is smarter than all these other people. This is scary to me as a scientist, right? And as a science educator, right? This is scary that we are looking at so much of this kind of thing permeating our society. Science denialism, which I wrote a book about a few years ago, especially about the attacks on climate change and evolution from the right wing. Lots of people, especially from the Republican Party, have come to distrust science, even as it has made their lives better, and even as it has allowed them to survive childhood, which most kids didn't 2 centuries ago and still don't in many underdeveloped parts of the world, even as it makes the technology that we're using right now possible. Okay, so there's some scary numbers here in this story here about people becoming skeptical that science is really real. Okay, and it's almost entirely partisan, right? It's entirely correlated with being members of the Republican Party or of our church group, that you've had these people don't want to believe in science. We've heard over and over again Republicans saying we should not encourage people to go to college because it makes them lose their religion and drift away from the Republican Party. And now they're saying, 50% poll recently, 58% of Republicans say that college and universities have a negative effect on our country. I mean, this is the intellectualism on a scale I never thought would ever happen. Okay, so let me begin with a positive note here and give myself a few minutes for questions in the audience. What is it we can do? Okay, some of these things are easy, some are not so easy, but they're pretty much all part of the solution, and we're going to have a solution. My approach as a science educator, especially because I teach a lot of giant non-major courses with 300 students in them, is at college level, at least, it's not satisfactory to just know some fact, spit it back to me in a multiple choice test, which I never use anyway. I've never taught with a multiple choice test now in almost 50 years of teaching. Okay, I only believe in essay questions. I only believe in essay questions and force them to tell me in their own words the evidence for why a scientific community believes a certain thing. Okay, how and why we know this is true about the world, not just a bunch of rote facts to memorize like they did in high school, which didn't apparently teach them much. Okay, and with that comes, again, critical thinking, getting students how to recognize good ideas from bad, and especially get them away from the damn internet once in a while. Okay, I know you guys are all addicted to being on your search engines most of the day, but you have to, as you get older, you develop a pretty good filter of spotting garbage on the internet because you know it's there. And we just got to get more people more recognized and ready to realize it. There are sites, that check, especially fake political news, that you can look up, but not everything in the internet is screened that way. Teach people about conspiracy thinking, how it works, and how the garbage on the internet is basically self-feeding. It works faster if it's hit on more, and then it pulls more people into other sites. And recognize that the internet is not a reliable source of information unless you're coming from a site that is part of a reputable scientific organization or something that is quality checked. And realistically, I'm not optimistic at the moment, because we have one political party that's gone deep off the deep end of crazy thinking and the crankpot thinking, definitely tied to science denial, especially climate change denial, because a larger source of their funds come from energy companies. And conspiracy thinking has clearly taken over a big chunk of the modern GOP. That is not going to be fixed until we see some changes politically in this country. And I'm hoping that this is not a permanent thing that will drag us forever into a world where we have a lot of people who just simply believe QAnon is more reliable than anything else. Yes, people like to repeal reality. They don't want to believe what's really out there. Okay. And Carl Sagan, of course, I'm sorry, sad to, he's no longer with us. He put it very nicely in one of his last books, The Demon Haunted World, in '96. Arranged a global civilization with the most critical elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We've also arranged things so almost no one understands science and technology. That's a prescription for disaster. And then I'll finish with a little image here from The Onion. Scientists report an Earth endangered by a new strain of fact-resistant humans. All right, and I'll stop there, and I apparently have like 4 or 5 minutes left. I don't know how you're going to handle questions, but I'm happy to do it if we can do it technically.
Well, that will work for me. Mark, we're up. Can you hear me, Don?
I hear you. Go ahead.
Wonderful, wonderful. So do you think anything of this has to do with not having globes in the classroom anymore? I know that when I grew up, there were globes, but my kids in school, I never saw a globe.
It's probably just because of funding cuts and not necessarily, I mean, they don't teach geography as a standard course anymore either. And a globe is usually part of a geography curriculum, so I don't know you'll see it as many times anymore. I mean, I had a geography class in 7th grade. They don't do that anymore.
Oh, goodness.
Curriculum has changed, and globes are part of a certain curriculum, so they tend not to be there unless there's a reason for them. I have a problem even at university level. A lot of my classrooms are just general purpose classrooms, and I come in there to teach oceanography or meteorology, and there's no globe. In a regular geology classroom, there's always a globe. You can count on it. But I end up teaching in general purpose classrooms with no periodic table, no globe, nothing I can really use. I have to carry it all myself if I want it.
Oh, for goodness sakes. Well, we do have a couple more minutes. If anyone has any questions, there's a microphone there in the aisle. Don't touch it, please, because Mark will be very upset. And I see someone heading to the microphone now. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hi. Thanks for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
And I have to say, I was almost dragged here against my will, and I was fascinated, so thank you for making this totally more than worth my while. I'm curious, what do flat earthers say when asked about the reasons that the purported liars lie? In other words, why do the supposed lying governments and scientists and NASA, why do they bother lying?
Yeah, that's a bizarre thing. I mean, they don't always give the same answer either. It usually starts by becoming part of a crackpot idea and becoming very central to your life, so you become a dedicated flat earther. Then at that point you have to say, okay, well then everyone who's been telling me this is lying. And then most of the time they just make up some kind of weird mixture of, well, they're all trying to get our money, or all trying to run this society, or all trying to get more power. There's never any consistent reason given for our supposed worldwide global conspiracy. And that's generally true of conspiracy thinking in general. They don't understand or really even have a good answer for why anyone would bother to mislead them at that level. But they are convinced of something that they think is real. It's QAnon believing that the government's run by pedophiles or whatever. And then from that rabbit hole, everything else looks like the world is trying to get you. And so I don't see them as ever having a consistent answer on that. And if you really look it up, you won't find any consistent answer among these people who believe in conspiracy nonsense.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, Don, it looks like you've got a couple of minutes left for shameless plugs. I know I'm going to be buying
I already gave
book.
the shameless plug at the beginning of my talk.
That's all right. Give us another one. I'm certainly going to be buying this book as soon as I get off.
Well, if you haven't already
stage.
seen it yet, this is it. It's called Weird Earth, which of course with my shallow focus camera doesn't work very well. Weird Earth, debunking strange ideas about our planet. Indiana University Press came out last year, and you're welcome to take a look at it, because what I do is, you'll see at the beginning is again talk about the nature of evidence and how we are misled by a lot of things, and then talk at length about each of these examples, starting with flat earthers and geocentrists and hollow earthers and expanding earthers, and most of the other examples I mentioned briefly at the end there, and give a full chapter each. And wherever I can do it, especially those concepts that we mentioned at the beginning, I have a whole section with illustrations about why scientists believe the way they do, what evidence gives us that understanding, which is something you don't find in textbooks very often. And that is, to me, is just as important as knowing the facts themselves.
Definitely is. And I'll give a shameless plug for Dragon Con. At 7 o'clock tonight, we have a moon landing hoax talk. So we'll be addressing some of the other points that you brought up and weren't able to address in detail. But thank you so much for joining us. Let's give Don, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I can't hear the room at all, so I don't know how to interact.
Well, everybody's clapping, and I'll text you pictures of your crowd later.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you so much. I really hope that someday that you can actually appear in person.
I know. Labor Day weekend's bad for me because that's usually the first week of classes, and it's tough to get out of town. So.
Yeah, that's what we talked about. And so maybe someday when it's less intrusive. But we really appreciate your presentation. I've been wanting to have you here for a long time. And if there's one good thing thing that could possibly be said about COVID is that it's made us possible to have speakers from all over the world we have been able to enjoy remotely, which has been terrific. So thank you very much for coming to DragonCon. We will have to clear the room after each of the talks, but please come back. We've got a talk coming up actually, it looks like we've got 2 on the schedule. I'm not sure. Is it the Argo talk is next? Okay, Argo's coming up next. Please come join us for that. It's going to be a wonderful talk. And if you have any questions for Dawn, I guess that you can email or text or talk to me or something. We'll get you in touch. Thank you very much for joining us. Remember, be safe, be skeptical, and do no harm. See y'all later. Bye.